Welcome to The Real Heal, a show featuring real, raw, and authentic conversations between experts in the holistic health space. I am your host, Dr. Renee Wallenstein, also known as the libidoologist, double board certified doc, entrepreneur, as well as healthcare disruptor. So if you're ready, let's get into it. I'm so excited to welcome and watch, because I can see him, Dr. Tim Jackson, to the show. Welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Renee, for having me. I'm very excited to chat with you today.
Yeah. And, we're going to go a few different places that we've never gone before on this podcast. And I'm really excited because you are a wealth of knowledge. And so I feel like there's so many different areas that I can tap into your brain and extract some really juicy, useful information for my audience that they've never probably heard before. But before we get into the juiciness, why don't you tell us who you are and how you got doing what you're doing today?
Yes, so I went to undergrad at Wake Forest University in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and I majored in health science and minored in chemistry. Took all the pre-med classes, and I did a lot of preceptorships at the medical school. And one day, one of the residents kind of pulled me aside, and he said, "Listen, I know you're really into fitness and nutrition, and you can definitely go to medical school if you want. You're smart enough, but you're not going to learn any of the stuff that you're interested in. So just get a ticket in something in healthcare, a ticket to play the game. And, unless you want to be a surgeon, you don't really need to become a DO or an MD.
Mm-hmm.
And then my senior year, I had an orthodontic jaw surgery, 8.5 hour surgery that left me very weak. And I went from, leg pressing 500 plus pounds to barely being able to walk.
Mm-hmm.
And basically now I know, looking back, that it brought some infections like Lyme and co-infections and mold that were subclinical, and my immune system was able to take care of. It allowed them to flourish and become clinical. And so, back then, functional medicine wasn't nearly as in vogue as it is today. Plus, I'm in the southeastern United States, so it really was, behind the times. And so now people are a little bit spoiled, but I'm happy for that. I'm happy that people have access to the information. So that's kind of how I got here.
I love it. So, it's such an interesting story too, because I think if I had, been told by, and again, our lives are different based on our life experiences, right? But I totally agree with you. In like medical school, you learn how to prescribe the medications and make a diagnosis and all the things, but to really get to the root cause and truly heal people, you got to go a different route. And I think we all get here somehow into this functional medicine realm. And you got here probably a little earlier than I did, but a lot of times it's either taking our passions or something personal that's happened to us that got us here today. So again, you have such a wide range of knowledge on so many topics, and you essentially help people live better lives. But I thought one of the places that we could start with is talking about mitochondrial health, because a lot of people don't know what that means. They don't know what a mitochondria is. Like, they kind of heard the word, but what is it? So can you just tell us, what are they? How would a person know if they had an issue with their mitochondria? And maybe 3 tips to help someone improve the health of their mitochondria if they think they have a problem.
Yeah. So, if you look at any biology textbook from middle school, high school, it's going to tell you the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. And that's true. It's definitely the powerhouse of the cell, or the battery of the cell, but it's also an entire signaling system in the body. So it signals, what fuel sources we're using. It signals what organelles get, repaired and recycled. And so it really affects pretty much every system in the body. The only cells that don't have mitochondria are red blood cells. Mm-hmm. And so depending on the tissue, that determines the number of mitochondria we have. So one way that people can know if they have something wrong with their mitochondria, if they have any sort of neurological issue, whether it's MS, Parkinson's, any sort of anxiety, depression. So the brain consumes around 22 to 24% of our oxygen, but it contains 9% of the body's mitochondria. So that means you have a little bit of mitochondria consuming a lot of O2. And so one of the first places you notice is in your brain. So if you have brain fog, there's a good chance that there's a mitochondrial component. And then the second system that has the next most mitochondria is the cardiovascular system. So I actually know of a cardiologist, I think he's in Ohio, and he does VO2 max treadmill testing, where you measure maximum oxygen uptake to see how far along people are progressing with their mitochondrial healing. And so, again, the brain, the heart, the GI tract, even. So, if we wrote down every imbalance, syndrome, disorder on a dry erase board and looked at the common denominator, almost always there's a mitochondrial component, some disorders more so than others. But if you've had any sort of procedure, like we were talking about your surgery, and people that don't heal well or who are kind of lagging behind schedule on those milestones from the orthopedic surgeon, a lot of times mitochondrial ATP or energy production is lagging. And so there are some very simple things you can do that aren't expensive to improve your quality of life, because I tell people, if you think of an Olympic gold medal winner, that's going to be optimized mitochondria. If you think of someone in ICU with multi-system organ failure, that's going to be poor mitochondrial function. So some basic things that you can do, one is grounding or earthing. And so, right now it's summertime, make sure you spray your feet with some natural bug spray to keep ticks and other insects off your legs and feet. But walking barefoot on the ground helps to add electrons to our body. And anytime you add electrons to our body, it is anti-inflammatory. And so that's going to, we got to remember the mitochondria work on the electron transport chain. So it's like playing hot potato with electrons, passing them down the line. And so if you can do grounding or earthing, that's going to benefit your mitochondria. And then you can kill two birds with one stone and get early morning sun or late evening sun while you're grounding. And those photons help to drive the proton pump in the mitochondrial ATP cycle.
That's so good. And it's funny you said that. I took my shoes off and put my feet on my grounding mat that I have underneath my desk here, and I have a but you don't need anything fancy like that. Like you said, you can just go outside, put your feet in the grass, and and ground yourself that way. And it's that simple, right? Like,
Absolutely.
now, is this something, do mitochondrial health decline as we age?
Yeah, so typically it's a little bit counterintuitive, but every time we produce ATP or energy, we produce free radicals that are a little harmful to the mitochondria themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as we produce more and more energy, we're also going to damage the mitochondria a little bit more and more. And one thing we have to remember is that our nuclear DNA, so you have, the cell wall, then you have the nucleus and the nuclear DNA, and that nuclear DNA is protected by proteins called histones. So that DNA is not as easily damaged as mitochondrial DNA, which is floating out here in the cytoplasm, and it's not bound with histone proteins. And so, that's one way that non-native EMFs, 5G, Wi-Fi, can damage the mitochondria through free radical and peroxynitrite production.
I'm so glad you touched on that, because that's another area we've not talked about on this show, which I'm excited to talk about at some point. And not to be a Debbie Downer, but we're inundated with EMF and, all these like a faster internet, higher tech, like it's just harming our health, and people just don't know how. And that's one way. So really important. Now, can a decline in the function of the mitochondria also produce symptoms like low energy or fatigue?
Absolutely. And so a few things, and it's kind of a bidirectional relationship, but low mitochondrial ATP production leads to a dysfunctional immune system. So
Mhm.
oftentimes on blood work, we look at immune cell counts, but we don't look at immune cell activity.
Mm.
And you can have enough of, T cells, CD4, CD8, but if they can't produce enough energy, then they
Mhm.
can't get to the areas that they need to clean up debris and things of that nature. And so, immune cell counts, can vary in terms of their effect on mitochondrial health, but almost always improving mitochondrial health will improve immune function.
Mhm.
Conversely, it's Dr. Alex Vasquez refers to them as or microbial mitochondropathies, where you basically have these pathogens, and pathogens are going to create inflammation or
Mhm.
cytokine storms.
Mhm.
And those inflammatory compounds basically beat up on the mitochondria. And
Okay.
so, if you can protect it with antioxidants like vitamin E with tocopherols, tocotrienols, vitamin C, CoQ10, things of that nature, that goes a long way.
I love that. So yeah, it's what I was just going to ask you about autoimmune conditions, because of course that's a dysregulation of the immune system. And of course it makes sense that even infections, correct? Like chronic infections it's like a bidirectional, like you support the mitochondria to help the immune system, but then, a chronic infection or autoimmune condition can cause the mitochondrial damage. Um,
Absolutely.
so, even those supplements and the grounding and anything else when it pertains to chronic infections or anything pertaining to the immune system, because, I have a lot of listeners who are dealing with, as many people out there with autoimmune conditions, anything extra for helping support their mitochondria.
So, one thing that I really like is molecular hydrogen
Mhm.
water.
Mhm.
You can get the tablets that you
Mhm.
dissolve in water. And one thing that makes it so special is it's a very tiny molecule.
Mhm.
So it can get to where it needs to go. A lot of times, supplement companies put compounds that we know from research are good for the mitochondria, but they may be too large to get to where they need to go. So I have a machine called an AquaCure that produces molecular hydrogen water and the gas, so you can breathe it through a nasal cannula and drink the water. But that has a ton of research behind it, especially out of a lot of Asian countries, Japan, China, et cetera, showing that it helps with everything from Parkinson's to glaucoma to cancer. And so not only does it protect the mitochondria you have, it helps you build new mitochondria. And
Mhm.
that's really important because previously aerobic exercise and exercise in general really was the only mechanism we knew to increase the number of mitochondria.
I love that. So are you saying that the tablets are also effective or
Yeah,
no?
the tablets
Okay.
are also effective.
Okay, good.
The reason I decided to get the machine is that, when you start doing the math, the machine's obviously going to last you, years and years.
Yeah.
And you have two methods of delivery versus the tablets. The other thing with the tablets is that when you put them in the water and let them dissolve, when
Mhm.
you take a swig of the water, you have to put the top back on very quickly. Otherwise, it diffuses and the
Mhm.
concentration decreases and the
Mhm.
efficacy decreases. But
Gotcha.
it's very effective in terms of balancing cytokine storms. So I won't say the word, but that pathogen that's been going
Mhm.
around,
Mhm.
one of the ways it harms us is through cytokine storms,
Mhm.
which is just an inflammatory cascade. And molecular hydrogen definitely helps with that.
I love that. And, I like to toot my own horn. As we were talking about my surgery, I had a visit yesterday and they said I was a little bit ahead of like where they expected me to be. And one of the things I've done post-op is drink hydrogen water. Like I have the tablets. I usually put it in my closed topped container, stainless steel, and I quickly take it off. I drink it, I put it back on. And, because it does help with the mitochondria inflammation, all the things. And there's a lot of things I've done post-op for my recovery to help my healing. But that is one. It's funny you brought it up because that's one thing that I hadn't been doing, but I added since my surgery. So I've been doing it
Awesome.
6 weeks now. Yeah. So I wanted to
Yeah,
make sure that the tablets were okay because that's what I have.
you're a great case study.
Yeah, I'm an N of one, I know, but I mean, if me trying to, and that's the thing, a lot of times I'll try something on myself and see the effects. And again, I'm healthy at a pretty much at a baseline, but I went in with pretty severe inflammation. So I do think it has helped my recovery. Definitely. Definitely.
Awesome. That's great.
Now, let's kind of go back to the energy and fatigue topic because a lot of my listeners struggle with this, as many people out there, men and women alike. And again, mitochondrial health, we know obviously has a role in that. But aside from the things I talk about a lot, which are adrenals, what are some other things that someone might consider as an underlying root cause of their low energy and their fatigue?
So I would say anything from low stimulatory neurotransmitters,
Mhm.
dopamine, histamine, acetylcholine, norepinephrine. So all of those, play a role, and you can have certain genetic polymorphisms where you may not produce enough of a certain neurotransmitter, or the receptors may be downregulated compared to other neurotransmitters. And so I always think of neurotransmitters because they actually start the hormonal cascade.
Mhm.
All those hormonal cascades and feedback loops begin in the brain. And so, if you look at hormones, you have to also look at neurotransmitters.
Mhm.
But with hormones, guys always assume it's testosterone, but it could be cortisol. But then you have to ask, okay, why is cortisol low? It's really a paraventricular nucleus in the brain issue. That's because the adrenals don't just wake up and say, oh, I'm really tired.
Mhm.
Any sort of inflammatory stressor, whether it's a surgery or a chronic infection or blood sugar imbalances, highs and lows, dysglycemia, they all can be harmful. And so by that, I mean, they create inflammatory stress, and
Mhm.
then that activates the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. And then when you wear down cortisol long enough, that's going to drag the thyroid with it.
Mhm.
And so, I tell people hormones should be kind of treated with insulin, cortisol, and thyroid at the bottom of the pyramid way before you start considering sex hormones.
Totally agree with that. And I think everyone wants to jump to the sex hormones, because that's where, I mean, I come in, but you gotta start way down. And no, it's not sexy to start with insulin and cortisol, but like that's where you have to start, because a lot of times you correct those imbalances, it's a trickle down effect, and you balance your sex hormones. So now I know you're a lover of fitness. So let's like kind of take a little bit of a turn. And again, you're into helping people better their life, their performance. So are you a lover of any particular type of fitness, as far as like do this, or do you think it's individualized?
I'm a big believer in giving people a little bit of what they want and a
Mhm.
lot of what they need.
Mhm.
So, a lot of times, guys don't really like working the glutes and hamstrings. But, if you think about it, the most common cause of falls in the elderly is, hip issues and
Mhm.
weakness of the hip cuff. So most
Mhm.
people are familiar with the rotator cuff, but which pulls the head of the humerus into the socket. But we also have a hip cuff, and it pulls the head of the femur into the acetabulum, which is outer part of the pelvis. And so, working the glutes is going to help you remain more mobile
Mhm.
and more mobile for longer. It will also, predispose or decrease the risk of sarcopenia and skeletal muscle loss.
Mhm.
And so, a lot of times we're sitting today, even young folks. And so that causes the glutes to basically go to sleep. And then, we have to kind of stretch the hip flexors or do some myofascial release to those. You
Mhm.
can do something as simple as rolling on a lacrosse ball on your hip flexors, which kind of feels like the first time I did it, I thought I was giving birth to a child. I thought that's the only possible explanation. but doing that, single leg glute bridges. And
Mhm.
then, obviously if you're rehabbing something, you have to be careful about, how much hip flexion extension you're doing, but deadlifting, which, I really don't like that name because it scares people off. It should be called the health lift. Because people tell me, oh, I don't need to do that. I'm like, well, are you going to bend over and pick up groceries? Then you
Mhm.
better need to, figure out how to do it. So I'm a big fan of lower body training. And my kind of lifelong dream is to combine, I never saw functional medicine, fitness, and nutrition as different entities. I saw it all sort of, on the same continuum. And so, I see guys at my gym all the time, they don't take days off and, they don't sleep well. And, guys 19, 20 already on anabolic steroids. And I say to them, if you're on anabolic steroids at this age, what's your life going to be like when you're 30,
Mhm.
40, 50? So, I think optimizing sleep, and there are a lot of gyms around the country that are focusing, taking a more holistic approach in
Mhm.
terms of focusing on recovery and regeneration. And if you think about it, if your hormones are balanced, your inflammation is low, then your workouts are going to have much greater results than if all you're focusing on is adding more weight, more weight, more weight. And so, I'm not a big fan of people doing chronic cardio. I think, if you look at the cardiac enzyme levels of people who just completed a marathon, it mimics the levels of people who've just had an MI. I'm not saying don't do cardio, and I'm not saying don't focus on cardiovascular health, but the way we go about it is
Mhm.
very important.
Mhm.
And so, doing things like circuit training with lower weight but compound exercises.
Mhm.
If you have access to a turf with a sled that you can push, that is incredible for conditioning.
Mhm.
And one thing that goes really overlooked and is highly underrated is walking.
Mhm.
I remember being shown a graph in my doctorate program, and it had the number of miles you walked here and the age at which you die on the y-axis. And,
Mhm.
it was linear.
Mhm.
And so walking is highly, highly underrated. And my dad, he had low back pain, and I sent him to a colleague, and he was getting adjusted sometimes twice a week, but he wasn't really doing anything at home. And I
Mhm.
said, you can't just pop in for 10 minutes, get adjusted. And so now he's walking 3 to 4 days a week, and his back pain's gone.
Mhm. I love that, and what I'm hearing is like, I think a lot of people even focus just on the weights, but it's also about stretching, and those rest days are really important for recovery, right? And I think it's the biggest thing I'm learning from just having surgery is how important stretching is. And I think people like in their mind think, okay, stretching is not going to help me my muscle gains, or rest. I need to pound it out at the gym, and that's actually, I know it seems counterintuitive, but that recovery rest days stretching is actually going to help, like you said, your muscle gains, as well as prioritizing sleep. And and everyone just focuses on the weightlifting and the nutrition. They're just not thinking of everything else that goes into it. So, and I love the comment on walking, because I've seen a lot on that recently. And that's, pre-op, the only thing I could do. And I was starting to beat myself up like, oh, I can't like even jog, or I can't do the elliptical. And I just fell onto walking a lot, and or as much as I could. And, the benefits of walking are real, are definitely, it kept me, as good a shape as I could be going into a surgery. And it helped, maintain a level of pain that was a little more doable versus the elliptical or something harder.
Yeah, and when you brought up a good point. So when you're walking outside, you're recruiting your hip extensor muscles
Mhm.
to pull your hip into extension. When you're walking on a treadmill, it's not completely worthless, but the treadmill is physically pulling your hip into extension. So the
Mhm.
muscle recruitment pattern is completely different. And for
Mhm.
someone like yourself rehabbing an injury, walking outside, you're going to get fresh air, you're going to get
Mhm.
sunlight. So
Mhm.
there's so many other benefits to it as well.
Totally agree. And it's my stress relief right now. And I can't, and initially I couldn't walk. I was on crutches, and it was really harmful to my mental health because I couldn't get out and take those walks. And I I realized the benefit of just getting out in the sunlight and getting some fresh air and hearing the birds and just moving my body, how beneficial that was to my overall, not only physical health, but my mental health as well. So,
Right.
so, let's touch just a little bit on diet. Is there any particular nutrition plan that you support for optimal health and performance?
Yeah, so I stole this from Sean Croxton from Underground Wellness. He
Mhm,
was one of the first podcasters doing what you're doing. And it's JERF, just eat real food.
mhm,
And so I don't agree with excluding any macronutrient group long term. I don't think that's healthy. I mean, I do believe in excluding simple sugars,
mhm,
but complex carbs are necessary for the science nerds out there. It's called saccharolytic fermentation in the gut. It's how we
mhm,
produce our short chain fatty acids, which feed our intestinal lining.
mhm,
And so, moderate to high protein, depending on your genetics, that determines how comfortable I am with you doing high fat or moderate fat.
mhm,
So me, I'm APOE 4/4.
mhm,
So a high fat diet is not going to do well for me.
mhm,
Now, obviously, you need a certain amount of fat for your cell membranes, for your brain health, for your hormones. But overall, I tell people the most important thing is avoiding GMOs.
mhm,
And, the way that GMOs got approved is they said, well, humans don't have a Shikimate pathway. And technically they're right, but our microbiome, the bacteria in our gut, they do have that pathway. And
mhm,
it gets disrupted every time you eat GMOs. And
mhm,
we know that there's pretty much a gut everything axis. There's a
mhm,
gut brain axis, a gut mitochondria axis, a gut skin axis.
mhm,
So, I don't tell people, okay, you have to eat these 3 foods on Monday, these 5 foods on Tuesday, because our ancestors weren't walking around with TI-83 calculators saying, okay, the inverse log minus the cosine of this many
mhm,
calories and this many grams of protein. You want to eat obviously a wide variety of foods, eating the same food. And I'm bad about this, I'll admit, eating the same food over and over because I'm a creature of habit. But that kind of taxes your immune system. And that's one reason why, elimination diets work well to heal and calm down inflammation throughout the body. So that's kind of my intake on nutrition and also timing.
mhm.
I think it's in Ayurveda, they say that every hour you eat past dark is an hour you take off your life.
Mm. Ouch. That's powerful.
Yeah.
Just remember that when you go to eat at 9 o'clock at night. Wow. And, so I think for my audience, again, a lot of my listeners are already overwhelmed, stressed out women. And I think that's very doable. Just focus on eating real food and eating the rainbow and eating, try to diversify, even if you want to eat a couple days the same kind of foods just to make your life easier. But then maybe change it up and like the next 5 days, try to eat a different breakfast and a different lunch. And because I get it, I'm the same way. I'm a creature of habit sometimes with my salads, just to make it easier. I'll make 4 salads and put them in a mason jar and like so I can go down and pour them out, eat and move on. And but then I'll vary up the protein and the greens and
Hmm.
the veggies that are in there just so my gut microbiome sees different kinds of nutrients and toxins and hopefully I don't develop any sensitivities to any sort of food, which I know is a big factor. When I've done my food sensitivity in the past, it's things that I ate all the time or drank coffee, spinach, the things that are healthy, you never thought you'd have a sensitivity to. And I did just because they never rotated out of my diet. They were always in
Right.
my diet 2 to 3 times a day. So that's super impactful. And I think, from the fitness perspective, walking is so easy and then adding in some weights, boom, can be done, right?
Absolutely.
You don't have to pound the weights for hours on end in the gym, right?
Right, absolutely. I mean, I would say, I see people at the gym, power lifters who are squatting, deadlifting, and bench pressing. And, they have big arms and shoulders, but they also have huge tummies. And I'm like, just a little focus on digestive health would take you a long, long way.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. And so like right there, it's just super, I think, tangible, not so overwhelming things that, you know, men and women in my audience alike can start implementing little by little. And then, obviously putting on their radar a little bit about the mitochondrial health and energy to sort of like, these two things in and of themselves, getting a nice whole food based diet with lots of nutrients, getting your sleep, getting your hydration, and moving your body could probably help a lot of people out there with their energy and fatigue and their mitochondrial health. So
Absolutely.
I have found a way to tie this all together. So like there's a lot of things I wanted to pick your brain on, but they all tie together. And I do think there's it's very basic. And what I often say is a lot of the things we're talking about are simple, right? The lifestyle changes, the nutrition and such, but they're not always easy. And we get that. But little by little, you start making those changes every day, one healthier habit. Before you know it, at the end of the year, you're going to have a whole different lifestyle and you're going to feel a whole lot
Absolutely.
better. Right.
Absolutely.
So final question, what is one thing that you know now that you wish you knew 5 or 10 years ago? Or maybe even longer, maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, depending on when you had that aha moment.
When you're going to make a change in your nutrition, lifestyle, supplementation, exercise, ask yourself if it's sustainable.
Mm.
And so what I mean by that basically is I was very heavy on the supplements when I first started practicing. And if I could go back and do it all over again, I would invest that money in a sauna.
Mhm.
Granted, saunas were a lot more expensive then, but if you buy things like red light therapy devices, which help the mitochondria, sauna, you're going to have those for a long, long, long time versus a supplement that you might see moderate benefit from, but you have to buy month after month. Now,
Mhm.
I still take, 5 or 6 supplements every day.
Mhm.
And so I'm not against supplementation at all, but I call it green allopathy, where someone comes to me and they're on 14 medications and they want me to just switch them to 14 supplements. That's not really, an improvement.
Yeah, I agree. Totally agree. And again, the red light, the sauna, they're investments, but like, look at how long you're going to have them, right? I bought my sauna, my infrared sauna, gosh, 3 years ago. My husband's in it every single day, doing his work. I bring work in there. Like, it's not like you have to just sit there, or you can sit there and have a little self-care and read a book or what have you, but it's really beneficial. And if, just think about it, you have it in your home, you don't have to go and pay at a med spa,
Right.
that's really expensive. And same with the red light, same thing. So,
Absolutely.
again, the price tag looks big, but when you think of how long and how sustainable it is, it's so worth it. So worth
Yeah,
it.
absolutely.
So, how can my audience connect with you? I mean, how do you work with people? How can they connect with you? Because I'm sure they're going to listen to this. You are just a wealth of knowledge, and we may have gotten some sciencey in a few different parts of this conversation, but like I think you're just a wealth of knowledge, and you can bring it to that level. So, I'm sure my listeners are going to want to connect with you. And how can they do that?
Yeah, so I'm sure you guys are going to share the link to my website.
Mhm.
And then when they click on that, you can go to the top where it says work with me or apply to work with me. And when you fill out that form, it sends me an email and then I can respond to that. And I'd like to offer your listeners 10% off on an initial 1 hour consultation.
Wow.
So if
Okay.
they want to use the code Dr. Renee,
Okay.
then in the subject line, then I'll know to give them a discount.
Love that. Perfect. Thank you. That's super helpful. And are you on social media anywhere that they can connect with you?
I'm on Facebook, Dr. Tim Jackson, or my personal profile is just Tim Jackson, and then Instagram at Dr. Tim Jackson.
Perfect. So good. Thank you so much for being here today. And again, I think this was a really useful interview, a lot of useful information that women and men alike can just start implementing today and move forward and actually feel like a different person by the end of the year. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Real Heal and that you learned something new. And before you go, can you do me a quick favor? Take a screenshot right now and share it to Instagram and tag me so I can celebrate you for taking action and improving your health. And if you're enjoying this podcast, please take a minute to leave me a rating and a quick review. This will help others just like you find the show. And do not forget to subscribe because You will not want to miss out on any of the amazing guest experts that I have coming up very soon. And remember, it's not selfish to take care of yourself. Do one thing today that makes you happy and learn to love life again. And with that, I'm out of here. Talk to you again soon.